What's going on, everybody? Good afternoon. We're going to shift gears just a little bit here because soon there won't be much of an opportunity to shift gears because we're going to have actual football stuff to talk about. We're going to have actual training camp. We're going to have actual pads being put on. We're going to have actual tackling maybe eventually. That'd be kind of nice. We're going to have football stuff consistently. So I want to go ahead and knock this out before we get there while we have all this unused time to talk about something completely unrelated, like, say, a video game. And I understand that this is very much a late video. I understand that this is very much after this particular game went in and out of the cultural zeitgeist. I understand that a vast majority of people who play this game have already beaten it. Many beat it months ago, but I didn't have the opportunity to finish it until a few days ago. So I'm going to go ahead and do my review now. I am going to keep it relatively spoiler-free, but if you're watching this video, you probably already beat the game. So I'm also not going to be obsessed with keeping everything completely clean. And even if you haven't played this game, you probably played the original remake that came out 5 years ago, so you have some context there. What was it, 5 or 6 years ago? I can't remember exactly, but came out a while ago. So even if you haven't played this one, you probably played that one, so you have at least that frame of reference, you have that context. So, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I finally finished it a couple nights ago. I streamed the whole thing over on my Twitch. It took way longer than I wanted it to, mostly because of the draft. I had to spend so much time covering the draft, I barely had any time to play Rebirth. And I also like to watch Mariners games, which usually are played during the time when I would be playing a game like Rebirth. So I would play other things that would allow me to use my TV for actually watching baseball games. So it took a long time for me to get through it. I would have certainly preferred to get through it in a more timely manner so I could get this review out like a month or two after the game comes out instead of several months later. But now we're going to talk about it. And maybe more people will watch this because they've actually played through the game and they can compare their experience with mine. But basically, here's where I'm coming from here, because context matters. And Final Fantasy is my favorite video game franchise. This is the franchise that really got me into video games. This is the franchise that really changed my perception on playing video games. This is a franchise I've been playing for over 20 years. I've played through nearly 20 Final Fantasy games. I've gone back and played Final Fantasy games that were long out of date by the time I got a chance to play them. I have played I played games just after they came out, like for instance this one. This one's a good example, Rebirth. So I've got a pretty wide berth of experience with the Final Fantasy franchise. So I know what I like, I know what I don't like, and the original Final Fantasy VII that came out in 1997, or was it 96 or 97? I think it was 97, is my favorite game of all time. That is a game that I spent hundreds of hours on back when I was younger. That is a game I've beaten 6 times, including a master file where I did literally everything you can do in the game. That is a game that really spoke to me. So when they remade the game, I was certainly excited. I was interested, but I was also very aware of the fact that it probably wasn't going to be offering the same experience. So I did really like the remake a lot. I thought it was bordering on a great game. And this one, I think that if you're being straight, I think that if you're being completely honest and objective, is clearly an improvement over over remake. This game is much bigger, there's a lot more to do, and unlike Remake, which was mostly on rails, this game is mostly open world. This game has a lot of open world to it, a ton of it. And I understand that some people aren't super into that, so it's a little bit of a subjective measure, but at the same time, this game just gives you a lot more to do. There's a lot more freedom in the way you choose to interact with the world, so I do think it is a much better game. Now, before I get into further detail here, I do want to make one thing abundantly clear. I thought this game was fantastic. I thought this game was amazing. It's not quite a masterpiece, but it was really, really, really excellent. And I think it's one of the best games of this generation so far. There's a lot to like. I do think the combat is commendable. And the main reason why I say that, and while I use that word, commendable, instead of other words I could use, video games have been trying to do the hybrid action and menu-based combat system for a long time, and I never feel like they get it right. Not really anyway. Like, just as an example, Kingdom Hearts tried to do hybrid action with menu-based combat, and I thought it worked okay. A game like Final Fantasy 15 tried to do that, and I thought it worked a little bit better, but still just decent. Even very recently, a game like Final Fantasy 16, I thought did it, and I thought it did it well, but I don't think I played a game that finds a way to combine the two genres in a way that makes sense better than Remake and now Rebirth. These games have found a way to make it as good as possible. And I want to stress that I don't think they can get any better with this kind of combat. And I mean that statement with both the positive and negative connotations that it brings. And I'll get more into that later, but I think the combat is as good as it can be when you're trying to make a game like this. An action RPG that combines action with menu-based combat. The game is beautiful. The game is huge. The game gives you a ton to do. I loved Queen's Blood, which is the mini game, which I think is offhand right up there with the best mini games in Final Fantasy history. I comparing it to some of the old games, like the only one I think is better is probably Blitzball. And Blitzball, you're never going to find another Final Fantasy mini game as good as Blitzball. It's just, it cannot be done. But you've got that. You've got the fact that the game is now being presented in a way. And I understand that the game's presentation is so different, it doesn't even feel like it's remaking the same game. But it allows you to get a better idea of some of the characters. And I like that because I love the original Final Fantasy VII. It's my favorite game. But you never really are able to get a sense for the character and personality of Cait Sith or Yuffie, I feel like, in the original game, because the way in which the game is being presented to you when you're playing through it, it's just really hard to get a feel for what the writers and developers are going for because they're being rendered in such a way. And this game, you get a really good picture of those two characters and their personalities. Yuffie is the Genki girl. Yuffie is the young and immature one. Yuffie is the one who gets very excitable. Cait Sith is the comic relief character, and you can clearly see the ways in which he is the comic relief character. He's, very irreverent. He's very goofy. He has the over-the-top accent. He has all these traits that mark him as very clearly the comic relief. And those are things that do not come across very well when you're working with early-era 32-bit graphics, and everything is just a polygon. Everything is just a poorly rendered polygon. You can only get so much of a sense of characterization in those circumstances. And sometimes it works out. Like, I feel like the main cast, like the main characters came across fairly well, but in this game, everybody comes across well because they're being presented so in such a fine amount of detail, which I think was great. I think that the story's interesting, okay? And here's what I'm going to say. If you played the remake, you already know what I'm going to talk about a little bit here, because unlike a game like, say, Persona 3 Reload, Final Fantasy VII's remake, which is now encompassed these two games and should encompass one more at some point, is deviating from the original. And I think they have done that fairly well. I will admit that. I have to give them credit. I understand they did it because they don't want people who play this game to know exactly what's going to happen at every single moment. if you're like me, you played through the original game so many times that if this game just gives us the exact same experience, we're going to be like, okay, I know what's going to happen here. I know what's going to happen here. I know what's going to happen here. There's nothing interesting. There's nothing exciting. It's the same story I've already played through, just presented in a much cleaner fashion. And um, I think that would have been fine. It certainly worked well for Persona 3. That game changed basically nothing in the overall, in the base story. But in this game, they continue to deviate from the original plot, and I don't mind what they're doing. I think it's okay. I think they're trying to be a little too meta with it, if I'm being perfectly honest. And if you play the game again, you know what I mean. But I think that it is a reasonable idea to say, hey, we need to give these gamers, these players, our player base, something a little bit different. We're giving them the same characters, the same universe, the same overall basic plot. Let's find a way to throw them some curveballs. And I don't have a big problem with it. I'm okay with it. I'm cool with it. I don't know if it's the choice that I would have made. So those are most of the main aspects of the game. So I want to stress this before I get into anything else that I say. For the game that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is, I really, really had a great time with it. Got a little bit lost every now and then. If there's anything that I can say, I think sometimes navigating the world is difficult because the map is not really aligned well with what you see when you're actually playing the game. I had many, many instances where I was trying to find something in the overworld on the map, and I couldn't get to it because the map wasn't conveying the path to me. And then you have to look up a YouTube video where somebody shows you the path to take, and it seems very arbitrary, and it doesn't seem like there was any logical way to figure out the path. You would have just had to brute force it. But I think that for the most part, while the world they created was very cool, it was occasionally a little hard to navigate. There were one or two fights that I thought were unreasonable. There were one or two fights that I thought were bull, especially on normal. There were, I think, 3 points in this game where I just knocked the difficulty down to easy, did a fight, and then set it back up to normal. And I obviously would have preferred to not do that, but this game does include some like cheap aspects to it, like one-hit kills and basically automatic deaths and fights that are really, really long. So it's really, really frustrating. So most of the aspects of this game, fantastic. And what I'm about to get into here at the end of this review is kind of difficult because my position when it comes to video games is that you have to meet the developer on their terms. You can't go into a Resident Evil game and then say that I don't like this because I was expecting it to play like Max Payne. You can't go into a RTS like a Total War game and then get mad because it's not playing like Crash Bandicoot. That doesn't make any sense. So I think it's very important to meet the game on its terms and evaluate it and judge it on those terms. And if you can't do that, then you probably just shouldn't be playing the game. That doesn't really make any sense. I feel like a game that I think is overrated, like maybe the original Halo or Earthbound or Shadow of the Colossus. These are games that I tried to meet on the terms of the developer, and I just still didn't really get it. But I feel like this is a little bit different because this is a remake of a very old game, and clearly with the decisions that Square has been making for the past, we're coming up on a decade now probably, they don't think that menu-based combat is going to fly anymore, because menu-based combat is all they did for a very long time within this franchise. And recently, they've decided we're not going to really do that much anymore. We're going to do some of it, but it's going to be a hybrid. It's going to be like Final Fantasy 15 or 16 or the remake or Rebirth. And I think what they're doing is good for what it is, but I really don't understand why we can't just have menu-based RPGs again, especially from this franchise. So this is definitely going into territory where it feels like I'm criticizing the game because of my own problems with it and not because of a problem with the game itself. I understand that. But menu-based RPGs still do very well. Persona 3 Reload did very well. The Persona franchise in general has never been more popular. Dragon Quest XI was a massive success. That game, in many ways, was the most successful Dragon Quest has ever been. So, I don't see any reason to believe that menu-based games are poison now. And with the decisions Square has made with the Final Fantasy franchise, it feels like they think it is. It feels like they are looking at that genre and saying, we have to adapt. We have to adapt to modern day sensibilities, and modern day sensibilities want an action game. I mean, one of the most shockingly good game experiences of the last decade is Baldur's Gate 3, which is not only is it a menu-based game, it's the purest distillation of Dungeons and Dragons we've ever had. So the idea that you have to make the game, your Final Fantasy games play like Devil May Cry with a hint of From Software games, I don't think it's true, and I don't think it's good. I think that the franchise that I grew up with, the franchise that I spent thousands of hours playing as a kid across over a well, let's just say over a dozen different titles, I don't know why it can't be like that. I don't know why you think that you can't find a way to make that type of game work with your franchise, which, by the way, is not exactly in the greatest of circumstances. I heard that Rebirth was considered a flop in sales. I know Remake wasn't. I know Remake sold extremely well, and I don't know if Final Fantasy 16 sold well or not off the top of my head, but what you're doing right now is not working that well, so you really don't have that much to lose. So while I understand that the die is cast and you do need to finish out this trilogy of Final Fantasy VII games with whatever the third part's going to be in 4 or 5 years, I playing this game, I found it, I sometimes was like, this is not as good as it could be because hybrid combat will never be as good, perfect. And you can make a basically perfect menu-based game. Because there's not much to it, right? You just have to make the menus navigatable and you're basically good. And then you have to build, of course, a good system. You have to build a good ability system, of course, but you can do all of that very reasonably. You did it many, many times in the 90s and even the 00s. So when I'm playing this game and I'm trying to kind of embrace the FromSoft elements of the game, and I'm trying to like block, I'm trying to parry, the way this game plays, the way this game flows, it's kind of a pain trying to parry. It's not like Sekiro. Like Sekiro is my favorite From Software game because the parrying is so perfect. If you want to parry something and you hit the button with the right timing, you know what attack is coming, and you read it properly, you will parry it. You will. Like, you're good. If you know what you're doing, you're good. I don't feel like that's the case for this game. I feel like, for the most part, it just wants you to dodge constantly, which, okay, I'm willing to do that. You can play it a little like Bloodborne, but you're not FromSoft. You're not doing it as well as they are. So sometimes when I'm in combat against a boss in this game, I'm thinking to myself, I wish I was playing Elden Ring instead, kind of, because while Elden Ring doesn't have a lot of the things that this game has, the combat's cleaner. You can actually, it really feels like you're in control and you can actually do the things that you need to do. In this game, sometimes it feels like you get hit and there's not much you can do about it, and now you're stuck in a big combo and you're just going to get hit over and over for 10 seconds. And it's frustrating because we play games all the time that play like this that work just a little bit better. You're not Sekiro, you're not Elden Ring, you're not Dark Souls. So if you can't do it better or as good as those, then maybe you should go back to what you did do better than anybody else. And obviously, you're going to have to update and adapt a little bit if you do that. Like, Persona found a way to make it work by adding the life simulator half of the game. Baldur's Gate made it work by embracing a full-on D&D campaign feel. And Dragon Quest was able to do it by just being a complete throwback, which probably only worked for one game, if we're being honest. Like, I don't think if Dragon Quest made another game that was just like the Dragon Quest 11, it probably wouldn't do as well because people would be like, oh, this is kind of dry, this is kind of dull. But there are things that you can do to make it work and still say we updated our formula. So I just wanted to go ahead and get that part out there because I don't know if it's a criticism of the game, but I think it's a mistake to completely go all out. I think the assumption being that modern gamers would be bored by that kind of gameplay. That's clearly not the case. Again, Baldur's Gate 3 is maybe the most impressive game of the last decade, and most important game of the last decade. That or maybe Red Dead 2. So if you don't see that and think, hey, there's a market for this kind of game, I think you're looking at the wrong thing. And yeah, there is a market for those Devil May Cry type games. There is a market for those FromSoft games, of course, but I don't think you're doing it as well as you could on the other side. But fantastic game. Loved seeing these characters again. Loved seeing them be presented in a different way that allowed me to get a little bit more in touch with them, a little more, have a better understanding of the way these characters are meant to come across. So I'm not taking anything away from any of that. I like, or at the very least, respect and appreciate the changes they're making to the original game's story to give us something new and unexpected. Like, when you get to the end of this game and you think you know what is going to happen, you're not sure. You're not sure what's going to happen because you know they're messing with the dials a little bit. And I think that's cool. I mean, that's better than going into the end of the game and being like, okay, I know exactly what's going to happen here. I just don't know how it's going to look. That's really about all I can say. So far, for me, Game of the Year is Reload. This is probably second place. It's not great that we're talking about two remakes for Game of the Year, but at the same time, both games were so radically different from the original, I don't even know if it's a problem. And I'd give it like a 9.4 or something like that on a scale of 1 to 10. I think most of my criticisms with it are not really related to the game that they made. There's a little bit of overlap there, but not a lot. But something to think about. It doesn't have to go this way. And I hope that Square, knowing that they're outside of, I think, Final Fantasy XIV killing it lately, is having problems with this IP, maybe there's a different perspective. All right, so I don't know when my next video game review is going to be. I am eventually going to play the Elden Ring DLC, but I don't know if I'm going to review it when I do. And by the time I get to it, it'll probably be already really old, or old relative to the the way the video game industry moves. There isn't a lot coming out in the near future that I'm super interested in. I will play the Persona 3 Reload DLC probably right when it comes out, because that's actually another 30 hours or so of story stuff, and I will probably review that. But other than that, the stuff that's coming out the rest of the year, I don't know. I don't know how much of it's going to interest me. It doesn't seem like it's a great second half of the year. All right. Thanks for watching. See you guys later. That's what I thought about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. They did a great job. But I'd like them to open their mind to something that I think they closed their mind to a while ago when it comes to making these games.